Sorry, just what's happening. Strangely enough, over the last few years, or last couple of years at least, most of my emotional connections, relationships, not all, but a very significant part of them, have been possible through this phone, through this object that I sleep with. It's the first thing I look at when I wake up. I always know how much battery there is and have to constantly think forward how I'm going to charge this thing, without which I can't seriously imagine my life. I can't imagine giving this lecture to you without a range of different types of machines, of camera, the computer, the telephone, the ability to quickly check something online. Have I got such and such theory right? Oh, I remember this instance which took place a few years ago. Someone told me something, and then what was it? And suddenly on Google I can find it. Consider what happens in a pub where there's conversation taking place, and people are sitting around, and someone plays on the jukebox some Pink Floyd song or some piece of music, and someone says, "Oh, this song was first performed at such and such a place in 1974." In an earlier time, there would be discussion, conversation, a lot of speculation, and laughter. Today, the minute someone says, 1974, you're like, one second, let's check that out. It's all as though there is this entire sphere outside of us through which we're connected to through these machines, through our computers, etc., which is an extension of our minds, of our memory, of our very, very being. So for a moment, think about what we would be like, what we would do if not for these machines, and especially as students living elsewhere, or as people who work in the development industry and are constantly traveling, are constantly moving from one place to another, and yet that sense of certainty, that sense of continuity is through our Gmail accounts or through our telephones. There's a complex relationship right now between our sense of self, between the way we exist, and the various machines that we interact with on an everyday basis. It can be argued that we are all cyborgs today. What is a cyborg if not for an organism which is a compound of the human and the non-human, between the animal and technology? Of course, it can also be said that our tools are implements. What is a machine? A machine is something that makes human endeavor easier, or makes it possible for us to exist in all sorts of ways. And historical materialism is precisely about that relationship between objects and the human condition, the articulation of objects and the human condition. So it's not that we suddenly became cyborgs. There's always been a relationship between the objects that surround us and ourselves, either as individuals or as communities or as assemblages. But we are in a peculiar moment right now where the significance of technology is far more visible, it's far more central. And that is precisely what we're going to be looking at in today's session, in today's lecture, is the relationship between technology and how we understand political subjectivity. whenever a group of Indians approximately my age, or maybe a bit younger as well, get together for a mehfil, to have a drink and to chill out, to do adda, inevitably conversation, especially conversation instigated by nostalgia, will bring us to getting onto YouTube and listening to old advertisements on television. And these nationalistic songs which we used to watch as children. When we grew up in the 1980s, there was one television channel. That was a state-run television channel called Doordarshan. And so anyone who could afford a television, or anyone who had interaction with television, inevitably watched the same programming, the same TV series, the same comedy shows, the same advertisements, the same narratives of nation and nationalism, etc., etc. And then structural adjustment arrived. With structural adjustment came the liberalization of the economy. With suddenly there was satellite television. Suddenly there was cable television. Suddenly there were 4 channels. MTV from Singapore or Hong Kong or something like that, and Star TV, and suddenly we were watching The Bold and the Beautiful and this and that, and there were suddenly a range of different programs, and then you have an explosion, a profusion of local, regional channels in a range of different languages, etc., etc. And in most middle class houses in India today, you'll have access to close to 1,000 television channels. The nature of the public sphere that we shared has completely changed. And of course, then you have the internet. You have a range of different things where suddenly our consciousness is populated by objects from all sorts of places, linking up with all sorts of different narratives. Narratives of the nation, narratives of region, narratives relating to language, to caste and race and sexuality, etc., etc. No longer is it possible to imagine, to do an analysis of, in any simple kind of way, of what is happening in the public sphere. One of the most significant theories of nation, and one of the most popular in any case, is that of Benedict Anderson, who talks of the nation as an imagined community. And what his reference is to a notion of time in capitalism, being homogeneous time. He's looking at ways in which suddenly it was possible, because of changes in technology, for a large number of people to be simultaneously reading the same newspapers, the same the same fiction, the same narratives about popular figures, etc. It was possible for the creation of a certain narrative that everyone shared. So it was possible to imagine oneself in relation, to experience oneself in relation to that narrative, to that homogeneous time. And that is how an imagined community becomes possible. That is how nation becomes possible, and nationalism becomes possible as a passionate attachment to a given narrative. The place of technology here is central, it's crucial. It is the material conditions for a political imagination. So this is kind of if you're looking at Marx and Weber as two separate approaches to that relationship between the material and the ideal. Right? Let me explain that a bit. And of course, Marx and Weber are not exactly opposite to each other, they're in relation to each other. It's a complex kind of conversation that happens there. But whereas for Marx, and this is extremely simplistically put, whereas for Marx, the idea comes out of material conditions. So your modes of production is what produces the political idea and ideology, etc. And that is why the history of the human condition, of the over the last 2,000 years or whatever, right, is about those shifts in materiality. Right? So on the one hand, the material conditions give rise to the ideas, and according to which then we have our political organization, etc., which creates their own effects. On the other hand is Weber's examination analysis of the Protestant ethic, right? where he's recognizing the realm of ideology, of the ideal, of the idea, as that which is producing a mode of production. So the Protestant ethic produces capitalism, gives rise to capitalism. The idea of the laboring body, the idea of the good laboring body, giving rise to accumulation, etc. Right? So these are two kind of different approaches to looking at the relationship between materiality and the ideal. And if we're looking at Anderson's kind of frame of the imagined community, that is kind of a dialectic between these two. So that is the homogeneous time of capital, which is enabled by the emergence of certain kinds of technology, which make it possible for a large number of people to simultaneously experience ideas, and therefore therefore produce certain subjectivity, a certain notion of self within the self-same nation. A very important footnote over there is Partho Chatterjee's argument with Benedict Anderson, where he's saying that, well, actually the homogeneous time of capital has to be put up against the heterogeneous time of post-coloniality, of governmentality in the post-colonial condition, where he's saying that it may be possible for people to imagine themselves in homogeneous time, but actually we live in heterogeneous time. We live in a heterotopia. So he's looking at the ways in which before inaugurating a big industry or a big factory, etc., there is a constant there is the performance of a big puja, big rituals, etc. The ways in which different imaginaries of the self, different cosmologies interact with each other, not oppose each other, but interact with each other and create their own effects. I want to take two directions in this conversation between homogeneous and heterogeneous time. One is kind of an example from the work of Aditya Bharadwaj on assisted reproductive technology. And he was doing an ethnography of IVF clinics, I think it was IVF clinics and not surrogacy, where he says that in each of these spaces, in each of these clinics, there is always a little shrine where people can pray. In the discourse of the doctors itself, there is a place for we can do our best through technology, etc. But ultimately there is an element of this, the uncertainty, which can only be in the realm of God. We can do this much, and then the rest is up to God. Now we have a situation where these two are not opposite to each other, but are enabling each other. There's a certain legitimacy to the honesty, to the claim of the doctor. There's a management of uncertainty and risk, because people are selling their land, they're selling their means of livelihood, etc., in order to reproduce, in order to be able to afford this kind of technology. So there's a certain way in which these different cosmologies enable each other rather than oppose each other. So it's in that context that we need to understand the contemporary moment as heterogeneous time. And This can bring us into conversations about how we understand modernity, how we understand political subjectivity, etc. And go back to legal pluralism and medical pluralism, all those kinds of conversations that we've already been having over the last few weeks. So that's one element to be looked at. The second is to look at the nature of the shift from what could be considered as a shared public sphere of the newspaper, etc., to the kinds of objects that we are engaging with now, whether they be blog posts, they be tweets, they be Facebook updates, newscasting, social media, all that kind of stuff. There is also a shift happening here from a certain analog way of being to a digital way of being. And there's a lot written in mathematics and philosophy, etc., about the continuities and discontinuities between the analog and the digital. But to explain what I mean by the significance of this shift, let me give you an example from my own field work, or rather my own methodology, a certain methodological moment. Now, when I was stepping out to do my field work, the question was, how am I going to record? How am I going to collect my data, etc. And by then, by 2005, most people were already using digital recorders. Now, of course, there's no separate digital recorder except if you want like high quality sound, because everyone's got their phones and phones do everything these days except heat your food, and that's only a matter of time. I, on the other hand, was kind of, I don't know this technology, I don't know what can happen, this is important material that I'm going to collect, these are important conversations to be had, etc. And I decided to go with the technology that I was comfortable with, which was the old style audio tapes. Old style audio tapes which I had grown up using. I have repaired my copy of Bad by Michael Jackson or The Final by Wham several times over, because you play the same thing again and again and the tape ultimately gets weakened or gets cut somehow, or you've got a faulty player, and all you do is you unscrew the tape and then you use nail polish. My first actual legitimate relationship with nail polish. And you stick that together. You cut it, you splice it together, and good as new. Yeah, a little bit of the song will be cut. So I knew how to manage. I had control over this technology. So I decided to go for these tapes. And so I came back with 120 tapes of, it was really a heavy bag and all sorts of complications because of that heavy bag. But then when I returned from fieldwork, I started listening to these tapes. And suddenly the pressure to make sense of all this, these beautiful long stories, some of my interviews went on for days on end, these recordings of music by queer artists in strange places, all sorts of things, the ambient noise, all that kind of stuff. These were experiences captured on magnetic tape. But then, how was I to transform all this rich experience into material, and from material into data, and from data back into a narrative of sexuality or whatever that I was working on? So I started to digitize these recordings. So you connect the little tape recorder to a computer, and suddenly you've got a digital format. And that completely transformed the way in which I related to those experiences. It was precisely about that moment, of digitization, which made it possible for me to immediately go to minute 32 of a given interview and transcribe that particular section and make that a quote. Someone said something, right? And I pick it up from that moment. I can go there immediately, pick it up without having to listen to the first 31 minutes before that or what happens after, which was necessary when I was listening to a tape. So that sentence, that statement, could always only be experienced in continuity with its larger context. That is the analog, as compared to the digital, where it's possible to create these objects. Just that statement, and that statement can be, wrenched out and placed in all sorts of different contexts, interestingly juxtaposed with other statements made by someone else or with an image, etc., etc., to tell a completely different, sometimes more interesting kind of story. But the nature of my material had been transformed in such a way as though there was no going back. Now let's bring this kind of idea of transformation from the analog to the digital into our understanding of our public sphere. We look at something like the meme. We look at the ability to imitate, to create new objects constantly simply by picking something up and juxtaposing it with something else. The ability to access all these things, like we were talking about, at the pub, through your cell phone, through Google. All these objects are suddenly accessible, and it's possible to make them part of that experience, to form these new assemblages. Right? That evening in the pub is completely different from what it would be where there's speculation, etc. These objects from elsewhere, some article written by someone about Pink Floyd in 1974, reproduced in 2011 by some fan somewhere on some website, suddenly into that conversation. So our very being, our very relationality with each other is digitized in a very complex kind of sense, and therefore changes the way in which we can imagine ourselves as political subjects, the way we act as political subjects. So that shift from the analog to the digital is not simply about moving from a tape recorder to CDs, to MP3, to I don't know what the latest technologies are, right? But the nature of that transformation is not simply about our relation, our experience of music, but of human being itself. Right? So what does it mean to now consider humans as cyborgs or as assemblages? At one level, we have already been assemblages, because the human animal, or that bare life that we spoke of last time, has always existed in conjunction with various other organisms and objects and substances, etc. I mean, from the simple axiom of you are what you eat sort of thing, and what one consumes, the substances that one imbibes, define our experiences or impact on our experience of being. Whether you have acidity, whether you have a hangover, whether you're feeling fresh and good because you went for a swim, etc. There's always some kind of a relationship with the substances that we engage with. On the other hand, there's the bacteria that exist within us, and there's the entire thing of good bacteria, bad bacteria, yogurt, and all that kind of stuff. But even our basic bodily functions of digestion, etc., are dependent on the presence of other organisms. So we are already, in some sense, we've always been assemblages, including things like our moods or the levels of hormones or the experience of premenstrual stress, etc., is all a combination of things like nutrition, relationships, the kinds of stress at work, the access to painkillers, a range of different things. So basically, to recognize that the experience of the self is already constituted of the interaction of various objects, various actors, and we will talk about assemblage and actor, etc. But let's focus in on what this means in terms of understanding the human as a subject. We've already spoken earlier in the course about that distinction between an idea of interiority as the space of the subject. Remember the Foucauldian notion, the kind of Western notion, the Hegelian split, the subject as a work on the self, a relationship with the self, as compared to the idea of the subject as constituted of relationships. So we've already kind of touched that territory, and now it's time to take it conceptually or theoretically to the next level. In order to understand what the significance of the notion of assemblage, we need to understand the idea of the rhizome, the notion of the rhizome that is introduced to us by Deleuze. It's a very Deleuzian kind of way of approaching the world. For the large part, the metaphor through which the human subject has been understood has been the metaphor of the root, of the tap root, if you're taking the analogy of roots. So there can be leaves that spread or roots that spread. The leaves do photosynthesis and produce the stuff that keeps the plant alive, and all of that kind of comes into the main stem, the main trunk of the tree or the plant, and then the root draws the water in, etc., etc. So the narrative of the self as that interiority, as that singular thing which is unchanging, right? It has a relationship with the soil and the water, etc., but the core remains the same. That is one of the ways in which the world has been understood. As compared to the idea of the rhizome. The rhizome is a particular kind of plant which grows underground. The best known rhizome is ginger or turmeric is another example, where there is no central root, there is no central stem. The ginger just grows in this direction or this direction depending on the conditions, etc., in all sorts of different directions simultaneously. There's no central narrative. And when the conditions are right, the root will stem, will sprout leaves or something like that, and then engage with the world in a different way, while at the same time somewhere else something else is happening. So the idea of being in this sense diffused and uncertain and going in all sorts of directions, which is not to say that it's absolutely arbitrary or random, right? But it's not all feeding back into one thing. The existence of this being, where does the ginger begin? Where does it end? Which is the starting point and the ending point? It is simultaneously in all these different spaces, simultaneously part of these different assemblages. Now take this metaphor to understand the human condition right now, or especially in the context of the relationship with the virtual and what that does for our sense of subjectivity, sense of self, etc. Now you look at, say, something like your Facebook feed, which has you may have joined different groups and had different interests. You've got that bunch of people who you grew up with in school and haven't met for a long time but have reconnected with on Facebook. That's one particular kind of space of nostalgia, of memory, etc. And then you're interested in that that particular artist. So there's a range of different aesthetics and people that come together in that kind of space. And you you look at your feet, and that's kind of a mosaic, a montage of these different worlds in which you articulate as part of those assemblages. So, and to then say, so what is, who am I if I am not this as well as that simultaneously? If I am not part of this assemblage and that assemblage and this assemblage, etc. simultaneously. You are all parts of different MA cohorts. At the same time, you are coming together in this unruly space from these different places, coming with your own different, contributing your own experiences, your own thinking to the conversations that we're having. What's happening here is a thing in itself, not unconnected with what you're doing in your MA Gov or MA Dev or your various other courses on democracy or this or that, right? Or taxation, etc. These are not completely disconnected, but you are part of different assemblages. So, what is that political subject? Where is that political subject? That would be one of the primary questions that we can ask in the specific context of technology and political subjectivity today. So the minute we start looking at the human as an assemblage and multiple assemblages of the self-articulating in multiple assemblages, etc. This kind of throws us back, throws a big question onto the idea of the bare life as the core and the place of the body and the corporeal in terms of the human. And I want to take this, get these two into conversation with each other by referring to one of the readings from last week, actually, the piece by Lawrence Cohen on his Agamben piece, where he's talking about organ transplant, and his notion of bioavailability, which some of us, including myself, are trying to develop in a new direction. His framework of bioavailability, or his definition of bioavailability, is the condition whereby the body becomes available for disaggregation in order to be reintegrated into other bodies. And he does a fascinating kind of analysis of the development of technology in the 20th century, or specifically transplant technology, where we move from a time where blood transfusion was a dangerous procedure which had to happen immediately. The blood needed to be taken from one person and put into the other. There had to be transfusion in the trenches, in the war trenches, sort of thing. And there was always the risk of there being a mismatch, etc. And then technology develops where it's possible to identify blood types. It's possible to use immunosuppressant drugs in order to make the question of matching between blood and organ almost irrelevant, etc. And where the bare life which is being reintegrated into another body is not coming from a relative or someone within your community, but where now it is possible for a kidney to be extracted from the body of a person living in a slum in Chennai and reintegrated into the body of a rich white older person in Europe or North America. So it's through technology that it is possible for us to actually disaggregate in very physical, corporeal terms the human body and reintegrate it into other bodies. So in very literal kinds of ways, we are assemblages. We are constantly disaggregated and reintegrated into other bodies. We're developing the idea of bioavailability to say it's not simply the reintegration into other corporeal bodies, but into equations, into calculations of capital, etc. How bare life is disintegrated. The human body is disintegrated and diffused, and becomes part assemblages on computers, becomes part of epidemiological equations, becomes part of various other calculations, becomes part of the entire carbon trading example that we used last time. Here I want to introduce an old philosophical conundrum called The Ship of Theseus, which is also the name of a brilliant film by Anand Gandhi. The story is, well, I shouldn't give you spoilers, but is about organ donation. It's about the reuse of human parts of a person declared to be dead into other people, and what that means in terms of experience. The philosophical conundrum of The Ship of Theseus is this: if you take the ship of Theseus and over a period of time you replace the masthead, you replace the sails, you replace the deck, etc., one by one, each and every component of what was the ship of Theseus is replaced. Now, once everything has been replaced and there's nothing from the original, is this still the same ship? That is one question. Secondly, if you take all the old parts once again and rebuild the ship, which one is the ship of Theseus? That is the philosophical conundrum, which relates directly to this question of, if the self is part of multiple assemblages, is there an original? Is there an original subject which can constantly be referred back to, even though we are constantly diffused, even though we are disaggregated and reaggregated, we are disaggregated and we enter into these complex relationships with other objects, with other humans, etc. Is there an original subject, or rather, should we, what are the philosophical and political implications of thinking otherwise? Thinking, well, actually, both these ships are, or if the different parts of this original ship are reintegrated into other ships, are recycled, are reused, etc. Right? Are we then all these multiple things at the same time? There's one distinction that has become quite popular in writing and thinking about technology and media, etc., and subjectivity today. And that's the distinction between what is called the digital native and the digital migrant. The digital migrant would be, let's say, someone like me. It's a function of age for the large part, but also a function of class and location. The digital migrant is someone who, or rather, let's start with the digital native. The digital native is someone who is already born into a world where technology is such that you're already constantly interacting with the digital, with the virtual. I remember quite recently visiting one of my ex-partners, and her little boy, he was, I think, a year and a half old, and while I was visiting them, I opened my laptop, and the minute I did that, his attention was completely taken in by the laptop, and he kept trying to poke the screen. The touch screen has become very much part of our embodiment, part of that child's. It's already part of that child's embodiment. That child is already being born into a world where interactions with other humans, with other objects, etc., is through that digital that digital interface. That's already part of this child's embodiment, as compared to us, who were born in a very different world, materially. Till law school, until the final year, I remember we used to write all our essays, all our term papers by hand, and then had to learn how to use computers, and everyone had to do computer courses and that kind of stuff. So this notion of how do we understand this distinction between the digital native who's already born into a world of computers and a digital migrant who has to relearn or reconfigure engagements in the world to learn afresh, anew, these new ways of being, these new interfaces, etc. And one of the things over there is this idea of in real life, IRL. I would suggest that as far as digital migrants are concerned, that phrase still makes sense in some ways, whereas where there is that, where the engagement through technology is one form of being that we are learning, as compared to earlier ways of being. So in real life means something, is something meaningful, as compared to the digital native, for whom these worlds are already merged into each other. They're already indistinguishable from each other. There are two instances that that would be interesting to look at in this context. One is the idea of the cyborg, quite literally the idea of the cyborg. So if you're looking at the work of Kevin Warwick, who places these chips in his own body and a chip in his partner's body in such a way that there is a connection between the nervous systems of these two people. So if he feels heat, there is a transmission to the nervous system of this other person. A new way of connecting with each other. The cyborg is connected, and this entire idea of I will be able to think thoughts, and then my partner or the state will be able to read those in any case. And that kind of stuff is already happening. If you look at the ways in which televisions watch us, there was that recently that controversy around with Samsung, where television is watching us, and there's research being done where which is able to identify where exactly on the screen your attention is caught, what part of the screen, what colors attract us, etc., etc., and on that basis then particular advertisements come to us. So or the way in which you send an email through your through Gmail, and suddenly the advertisements on the side of your Facebook, which is already connected through to your Gmail, are relating to you've looked for a ticket somewhere, and suddenly those advertisements come to you, etc. So in so many different ways, technology is already articulating us as cyborgs in that kind of way, in the sense that that our consciousness is already connected to other consciousnesses. And the other instance, or the other approach to this, the digital and real world kind of coming together, or technology and the real world coming together, is the example of Sixth Sense of Pranav Mistry, which is now kind of the basic idea behind the Google Glass kind of thing, where you can simply do this while you're walking on the street and you take a photograph, or you're passing by a wall and there's an advertisement, you just touch that advertisement, and that food or whatever it is that you've touched is delivered at your house by the time you get home, etc. So over there is a kind of dissolution of the boundary between the real world and the virtual. It's that division is being done away with. These are two quite distinct approaches. One which works from within, making the person cyborg, and the other where so technology enters the body, as compared to this where the human enters the realm of technology. The human enters the realm of of the virtual. So there are at least these two directions of work, of the ways in which our world is being reconfigured in terms of the removal of that distinction between the real life and the virtual, where they've become one and the same. So now let's get into Bruno Latour, who is one of the main theoreticians for this week's session. Latour is probably one of the most radical thinkers of the contemporary moment. And the reason I say this is that his notion of what sociology should be requires a complete reimagination, a complete rearrangement of how the social has been understood, of what the project of sociology itself is, and the very ontology of the world, of how we imagine the world, etc. His most famous book is We Have Never Been Modern. Now, Latour is someone who's claimed by the disciplines of philosophy, science and technology studies, anthropology, sociology, a range of different disciplines claim Latour for themselves, because his thinking has implications across the board in so many different ways. So in the reading that you all would have done this time, he takes apart this entire question of how can we use the word the social, how where the social is kind of put down as a residuary kind of category or a residuary kind of explanation, where disciplines such as economics and psychology, etc., have failed to provide explanation. Then we get to the social and we say, oh, social factors, etc. Rather than that, rather than looking at the social as a particular domain which relates in some way to these other domains of life, for him, we can't talk of the social, because sociology has to be about understanding assemblage, understanding association. That it is a sociology of associations that he is suggesting. Now, how is he? What is the framework that he's using? The most significant writing in that context is of course, Reassembling the Social, where he articulates this idea of this theory of the actor network theory. And in order to understand this, let me tell you about his earlier work called Laboratory Life, which I think was his first ethnography. Laboratory life is about science itself, the practice of science. And I'm going to simplify this completely. Now, the traditional notion of science, the positivist notion of science, which stems from the Enlightenment and the emergence of the mind-body dualism as a framework through which objects become available to the human consciousness for scrutiny. So the entire idea is that there is the scientist who sits above, and through the microscope looks at these objects. These objects have no agency in that entire relationship. All the power resides with the scientist, who is in a position to manipulate, to observe, to experiment upon these given objects that are being studied. And the idea of objectivity, right, is in this traditional sense, is premised on the distance that this person has, that the scientist has from the object that is being studied. The greater the distance, it's not personal, you're not affected by it, etc. That entire notion. So it's as though the scientist exists separately from that which she or he is studying, and is unaffected by it, etc., and is the sovereign, is the one that has the power in that relationship. Latour has a different argument, a different way of looking at what is happening, and this is why he's studying how scientists work, what scientists do, what their everyday lives are like. So he enters the laboratory, and I think it's the PCR chain reaction that machinery, etc., that he's engaging with. That's the laboratory context. To completely simplify what his narrative is, it's like this: you have the scientist who enters into the laboratory and says, "Okay, I am going to see what happens to this compound at 150 degrees. This particular substance, this object." In order to do so, the scientist must engage with something like the Bunsen burner, with the test tube, with the gas connection or the electricity connection, etc. A range of different factors, or rather different actors, come together in order for this experiment to take place. And for Latour, there's a relationship of power taking place between these different objects, these different actors, and the human actor as well. So the scientist takes the test tube, puts the compound in, turns on the Bunsen burner, and then heats it. The test tube says, "Listen, I don't want to be heated until 150. At 135, I am going to shatter, or I'm going to melt, or whatever." I'm just giving a random kind of example. And so the scientist cannot carry out that experiment. The scientist must either engage with some other test tube, break this relationship and engage with another test tube, or say, "Okay, well, actually I'm going to see what happens at 135 degrees or whatever." It's constantly changing, it's constantly in a tussle with these different actors. And this goes on for a long time, and there's the emotional life of the scientist and all sorts of different things. There's a strike which takes place where the laboratory can't be used, or there's no electricity or something, whatever. A range of different things are happening in this entire period that the scientist is carrying out this experiment in the laboratory. Finally, the scientist reaches a point where where she can announce that the experiment is complete. What is that point? That point is where the scientist finds a narrative, finds a way in which to represent everything that has happened in this period, everything that has happened in this laboratory, right? Can represent all that has happened in such a way as to establish that objectivity, establish that there was no question of power or engagement or negotiation of power between the scientist and these other objects. These objects are reduced to non-agents, to simply objects. Okay? And the scientist goes out and writes that up, and then this becomes a scientific fact that with this compound such and such a thing happens and can be repeated in the same conditions and that kind of thing. So in this entire process, what we have seen is that actually this carrying out of science, this practice of science, is a constant tussle of power between these different objects, or these different actors, including the human actor. Right? Rather than there being the human actor on top over there controlling everything happening here. And he comes up with this notion of the actor having agency, these objects having agency. Right? And that is the basis of his notion of the actor network theory. Now, very often people misuse this phrase. They think of actors within a network, right? As though those actors are distinguishable from the network. Actually, it's a compound phrase. It's the actor network. Because it is only in these relationships of power between these different objects that they become actors, that they act in relation to each other. Right? So it's not different people at different nodes. So you take Manuel Castell's idea of the network, which is very popular, in ICT kind of work, ICT for development kind of work, where everyone is simply at different nodes within somehow apolitical kind of network, and those actors are removable and identifiable separately from the network itself, from the nodes itself. They don't come into being in relation to each other. As compared to that, Latour's actor network theory, right, is the actor network is always articulating agency is always articulating within that that network. That is Latour's, very simply put, Latour's actor network theory. Now, what does this do in terms of, okay, let's ask two questions over there. One, what does this do in terms of this notion of objectivity? And secondly, what does this mean in terms of ontology? What does this mean in terms of the place of the human in relation to these other things, the thinginess of these things, the thinginess of the human? Latour's is an argument for a horizontal ontology. That is to say that all these actors are on the same plane. It's not that the human actor is up there and therefore able to create this thing of objectivity. Because the human is always, within the actor network, affected by those other actors, by those relationships, by those associations, etc. So Latour comes up with a different notion of objectivity. He says a statement is objective only insofar as the objects that it relates to are in a position to object to what is being said about them. So rather than a structure of objectivity being there's the scientist over here and there are these objects and there's this distance, a statement made by the scientist is objective only insofar as these objects can object to what is being said. So that means that is a call for a very located, a very it relates to a notion of action research. Of we are always by studying the world we are in it. We are impacting on it, and the world is impacting on us. We are constantly being recreated in those kinds of relationships. That's a very radical kind of notion of objectivity. It's a very radical notion of ontology as well, and this has implications in so many different kinds of ways. In every relationship of power where one actor is seeking to place itself above, whether notionally or in terms of the relationship itself, right? Every time there is a hierarchy, there can be a challenge to that in terms of creating a horizontal ontology. Yeah. So let's look at, to start off with, at new social media or new information communication technologies and what role they have played in the last few years in terms of the new forms of political action. And of course, Tahrir Square was immediately named the Facebook revolution, the Twitter revolution, because it was not simply the movement of ideas, but also in terms of organization, in terms of it happening, that event happening, that played a very significant role. Although it's very important to constantly remember that the Egyptian state blocked the internet in the last few days before Tahrir Square actually got occupied. So it wasn't, it shouldn't be used as a way to fetishize social media as the new political act. And similarly, when the London riots break out, there's this crazy anxiety by the state about how the BlackBerry messaging service, was crucial to the way in which the riots took place, and therefore, the same things that were being celebrated as, oh, look at the radical political potential and democratization, etc., was suddenly, oh, we need to regulate these lumpen elements, these criminal classes, and all that kind of stuff. But more, the question of the regulation of this, of ICTs, of technology, of connections between people and the new flows of information, of images, etc., is a very significant one, and that's one of the most crucial political questions of how the internet will be regulated, of how telephony will be regulated. But when the umbrella revolution happens in Hong Kong, where once again the internet is controlled, is blocked in certain areas where people are getting together, what do people do? They start using their Bluetooth technology to create these local networks of communication. So as a modality of organization, as a modality of the flow of ideas and images in such a way that it is not centrally controlled or controllable. Right? So we're seeing a diffusion of the possibilities of creating images, of creating discourse, of creating an awareness of what is happening, of the sharing of experiences, etc. Some people look at this as the democratization of image. And similar arguments were made about pornography, where with the emergence of the webcam and then all the porn that was being created suddenly in internet cafes and small towns in different parts of the world, where rather than the industry-made porn, which has a particular kind of narrative, you have all these other forms of sexual desire which are articulating all these other bodies which are not considered within the industrial kind of frame to be desirable. So new forms of desire, etc. Which is not to say, this entire thing of democratization also should not be fetishized. It is not to say that this, because images are being produced in all sorts of different places, whether they be sexual, whether they be political, whether it be beating of someone in some random place by the police, etc. All that enters into the public sphere. It is not that these productions escape the questions of structural power. It's a new articulation of that. So, for example, on a site like YouPorn, which was meant for user-made pornography, suddenly you have a return of those same forms which are so familiar in industry-made porn. And similarly, the question of how race articulates in circulation of memes and images, etc. So it's not that because there is the democratization, there is the diffusion of the power to create political discourse and image, that there is an escape from the structures of power, but it is a new way of engaging with the structures of power. There are new possibilities of engagement with structures of power, with the long-term kind of thing. Secondly, let's look at what's happening with information itself, something like WikiLeaks or something like Anonymous, which instigated the start of the Occupy movement, where the control over information relating to the way power functions leaks out, is able to circulate in other spaces and create political effect, create the conditions for political subjectivity and the recognition of the truth of power, of the truth of capitalism, etc. So there's something else happening over there in terms of the way in which information itself articulates, of the new technologies, the new materiality of power. The third is something that we will revisit in week 6 when we are reading Badiou, but makes sense to refer to it here in terms of the mechanisms through which a riot spreads. What makes a riot spread from a particular location, a particular moment to other places? When we look at the way in which there is the flow of image and idea, even if unarticulated, from say Tahrir to the streets of Rio, or to the reference, very explicit reference to Tahrir in the Rio protests, or looking at the way in which Occupy is referenced in Hong Kong, etc. There's a kind of resonance that is created in these different places where there is that recognition of a larger, this kind of recognition of a larger kind of reality or truth of the human condition and of power, etc. Now these resonances, and let the whole planet vibrate with those, with those sounds, with those chants, with those steps. Right? Those resonances are made possible because of these new forms of technology, the kinds of conversation that can take place, the way we know immediately that something has happened in Tunisia yesterday, or something is happening right now in a given place. That kind of thing, in different parts of the world. So we are talking about new conditions for the possibilities of the emergence of political subjectivity that is not does not end at being located in a particular geographical space or a particular struggle, but has a possibility of those resonances. This leads us to the final point that I want to make today, in terms of what this means as far as political subjectivity is concerned, and returning now to that metaphor of the taproot vis-a-vis the rhizome, where for the longest time the assumption has been that the function and the objective of politics is the realization of identity, because identity is the basis on which interest can be articulated. So it's constantly about that taproot. But if you're looking at these resonances happening in different parts of the world, and the nature of the political subjectivity that is generated from those conditions, it is possible to say that at least part of that narrative is the emergence of a transcendent political subjectivity, which is not located simply over here, but simultaneously is resonant with that, is speaking with that, is in connection with that, is learning from all these different kinds of spaces. So the political subject is not formed in a location, but is simultaneously being formed in these different kinds of spaces. The political subject articulates in these different assemblages, and that lends itself to the possibilities of a transcendent politics, politics that addresses a world's system, that addresses capitalism and geopolitics, etc. I think the end point is that in order to understand the significance of technology in unruly politics, we must also delve into these deeper questions of how we understand the subject itself. We have to get into some of these theoretical, philosophical conversations as well.